Hi UTM, today we have a very special guest. He is a UTM alumnus and then worked in audits and consulting for a bit at PwC after graduation, and now he is launching his own startup very soon, which we will talk about later on in more detail. But let's start off with an introduction to entrepreneurship. What kind of personal traits do you think make an entrepreneur successful?
Absolutely, that's a really good question, and I think entrepreneurship has a number of traits such as persistence, drive, but also just hard work ethic, and I think this is a really important one. And you always need to build a strong team that complements you, so you don't need to come in with every skill perfected, and that's also never going to happen. But being able to have a really good work ethic, really good organization and time management, and then just a desire to succeed in kind of that drive, I think will really take you far. Then just building the right team to complement where you might be weaker, or finding people that are really strong will help create that successful ecosystem.
Okay, so why is it that some people become serial entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for myself, this is kind of our first, real foray into the startup world. But ever since I was a kid, I've always personally had ventures that I've worked on, small things like, selling, different things like computers and building networks for people, and never really like scalable businesses, but always kind of with that entrepreneurial mindset. But I think what's really drives people to be a serial entrepreneur, it's just such an exciting journey, but it's not easy, right? But just the thrill of creating something that could change the world or change the ecosystem or society around you, or providing a service or a product that makes the lives of people that much easier. I think that's a really exciting journey that just drives people to want to do it not only once, but go in and do it many more times.
So say I wanted to become an entrepreneur right now, what kind of industries should I be researching, and how exactly can one successfully organize a startup?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? And so, of course, I would say that if you want to go into a startup, you've got to find something that you're passionate about. And my methodology is that if you're not passionate about it, it'll be very hard to succeed. And you're only going to be that much better if you're willing to put in those extra hours, you really love what you're doing, and so it's got to be something that you're passionate about. And so I would say the first step is really looking within yourself and trying to figure out, what do you like doing, what industries might you be interested in, have a lot of conversations with people, talk to mentors, try to understand, what is really going on around the world, and then see where does that match with your personal interests. And so there's also a lot of conferences that students can go to find out about what's going on in technology and sciences and arts, etc., and figure out then, what is some sort of problem that, you could go into to help tackle. I would say the best way to start though is, ideally finding that problem or that sector that you want to work in, and then try to find, startups in that area that you could at least help out, learn from someone that's doing it successfully, or even if it's not successful in the long run, because you'll learn a lot just by actually going in and getting that really wide skill set that you get in a startup, all the way from like sales, marketing, working with clients, working with internally and internal organization, working on things around culture. And so just going in and making that first step, I think, will go a long way.
So let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. Do you think that it is probably one of our biggest existential threats at the moment?
Yeah, it's been a question that's been going back and forth quite a bit, and I think right now there's quite a lot going on in the artificial intelligence industry, but I still don't think AI is matured yet, or by any means mature. And I think within the next decade, we'll get to a state where, we'll crack it in the sense that AI may be smarter than humans and may actually be able to create additional things smarter than humans. And I'm, start to get worried sometimes when you look at, a computer could technically know everything on Google, be able to understand and interpret it and make judgments from it. And if we get to that state, that will likely replace a lot of jobs. And I think that's something that, could get scarier. I mean, when you think about some of these industries like law or accounting or, even things like construction, when you look at what AI is starting to do, if you can have AI paired with some sort of 3D printing, you could actually build buildings and it can adapt for weather and other things that are going on and actually create things without the use of many humans or any humans. And that will be a tougher scenario. And I think this is something that governments also need to address. Because I do think that technological advancement is important, but I think we've also got to be conscious of the period where we might have much higher unemployment in the future because machines are replacing a lot of jobs and can do it better than we can. And that's something that we've got to be conscious of. And I think is also maybe a little bit gloomy, but I think on the optimistic side, I think technology will also create a lot more jobs when AI takes things that maybe we don't want to be doing, and we can go into a state where we're working on more innovative, more creative things that humans or that machines can't make the same types of judgments that humans might be able to make.
Okay, so how do you think AI is going to transform the way that we do business?
Absolutely. So I think we're already starting to see it today in the way that AI is able to do things in terms of machine learning and taking data and making kind of links that we otherwise couldn't be able to make in the same amount of time. And I think that's really going to start changing business. I think there's a lot of other kind of applications to AI, like when you look at, in the accounting industry, legal, as we talked about, there's a lot of different areas where AI can make certain judgments that, at least in the medium run, can take over those simpler judgments that humans make that maybe aren't as risky. And if they can start to programming the AI so that it can make those less risky judgments that aren't going to be detrimental, that's where it'll start to replace or at least cannibalize jobs that humans might be doing. So, but it will also, on the other hand, empower and make it easier to do the jobs that we do, because we can then do tasks that are less rudimentary. I think on the other hand, we've also seen from, say, like the finance industry, now there are machine learning and AI bots that can trade sometimes better than humans can and can make links better than some of the best investors in the world. And I think this is exciting, but it's also, on the other hand, it starts to also question when is robots or AI also gonna replace a lot of the things that we traditionally need graduates for, or that we kind of employ these sectors. So I think there's a flip side of this coin where we need to be very cautious of it.
So do you think that for existing businesses, it's going to be easy to adapt to AI once it becomes mainstream?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be really up to the executives of those companies and the boards to really be able to drive the adoption of these, right? And to be aware of what's going on, how can these technologies enhance the business, improve the bottom line, but also make sure that, it also improves the cultures in the workplace, and it improves the ability for employees and management to enhance the work that they're doing and do even more positive things for their companies. And so I do think that the adoption is really going to start with those early movers that are starting to adopt these technologies. I think it is still early. I don't think many companies have implemented these types of things, even when you look at chatbots and other things that are extremely successful and can completely replace staff or people right now. In fact, I've heard a lot of situations where sometimes you need even more staff at this point to pick up the slack of where the chatbots aren't able to do it, or to help integrate and build these chatbots and refine them. And so as of now, I don't think we're there yet where it's making a major impact, but it's starting to move in the direction. And I think that, just having very forward-thinking boards and management to look into these, explore what may make sense to the company from both like an innovation standpoint as well as look at their bottom line, and then starting to adopt them. I mean, in 5-10 years, I think that it'll start to move into the direction of being more mass adopted, and I'm sure there'll be companies that'll work on helping other organizations to integrate this more seamlessly into their businesses.
I completely agree with that. I feel like the narrative right now needs to change. What we can do is at least try to stay up to date with the current trends that are taking in the world and kind of develop that global acumen of sorts, just to kind of, be prepared for when it does really happen. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Okay, so you mentioned that you're launching your startup next month. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So our company is called the Global Digital Currency Exchange, or Global DCX for short. And what we're doing is we're launching digital currency exchanges, so cryptocurrencies, and it's the ability or to facilitate the trading of the major digital currencies across emerging markets. So an example of this would be helping to facilitate the trading of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, Ethereum Classic, Litecoin, Dash, etc. So there's a number of different currencies. And what we found is in emerging markets, you really only have the ability to generally trade Bitcoin, maybe Ethereum, but the other digital currencies don't have a very easy way to trade them. And it's not easy for individuals in their home countries to be able to enter and start trading these. And so what we've worked on over the last 7 to 8 months is a technologically advanced platform that can do 1 million transactions a second, and that allows us to provide significant amounts of liquidity that's never been seen in emerging markets into those markets with access to multiple digital currencies. And so that's what we've been working on. It's been a very exciting journey. We're launching in September in Nepal and India to start, and then we'll be working on launching a number of other countries that we have in the pipeline in the months to follow.
Interesting. So can you explain what blockchain technology is?
Yeah, so there's a number of different cryptocurrencies that are fueled by these or by the blockchain. And so what the blockchain is it's basically the ability to create a public system that can record, or a ledger on the blockchain that can record what is going on, or where are the transactions and who's holding the digital currencies. But because it's in this public manner, it reduces the risk of, say, fraud or the creation of additional tokens that aren't otherwise made public to the market or to the kind of the general consumers. And so there are basically thousands or millions of these records, and so when they don't match, you'll know that this one is the odd one out, this isn't part of the blockchain, and it'll essentially get kicked out if there's an attempt on fraud or creating additional transactions that aren't approved by what's generally considered as miners or stakers, depending on the type of blockchain that you're looking at. And so it is a very exciting innovation. It is, in my opinion, going to shape a lot of different industries as we see them today in the next decade or 2 decades. And this can range from anything from cloud technology to things in the sciences, things in the financial industry, and even things like just Bitcoin and likely staying as a kind of a place to hold your wealth or to kind of diversify your portfolio, similar to the position that gold has, as well as moving money across borders, which has kind of been an exciting innovation in the space as well.
So because of the emergence of digital currency or cryptocurrency, do you think that banks are going to be disrupted by these technologies, or are they going to disrupt the industry itself?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's hard to probably group all banks together because, of course, there's kind of innovative banks, and then there's going to be banks that maybe aren't as on top of the trends and what's going on. I think it's still very early stages of the industry, but I do think that many of the banks will continue to to explore digital currency, explore the blockchain, see how it can involve kind of their businesses. Many of them, of course, will start investing into it, will take over certain companies and technologies that can help to influence or enhance their businesses. But one thing that is for sure is banks have been around before capitalism and modern day capitalism. And so banks will continue to be there. They're not going to go away. I know a lot of people are talking about many decentralized ways of skirting banks or going around banks. I do think that this industry is moving in a direction of becoming more regulated, and banks will be at the forefront of this. A good example of that is Ripple, which tends to be the third or fourth biggest digital currency in the world. And it's basically the ability for instant wire transactions with no risk of fraud. And this is backed by many of the biggest banks in the world. Google's also backing it, Microsoft's backing it. And so there is already a very big movement in this space. There's also a consortium of banks called R3, over 100 of the biggest banks and financial tech companies are involved in it. And so there is a lot of interest in this industry, and the financial companies and the banks are trying to stay on top of it, although it's moving pretty quickly.
All right, so do these technologies have some sort of central authority function? How exactly are they being regulated at the moment?
Yeah, so this is one of the interesting hallmarks. Digital currencies, started with the idea of being fully decentralized and, being able to not be governed by governments or by banking institutions or, the traditional way that we see kind of things regulated. On the other hand, there are a number of digital currencies right now that are centralized, and Ripple is an example of that, where there is a central body. It also provides the additional ability to be more agile, because a centralized body will be able to make decisions or adapt to changes in the industry and adopt things that might make the currency even better. And so this is where certain things are going centralized, certain things are going decentralized. I personally think that both have a place to succeed. I think some of the centralized ones will be easier for governments to regulate and to understand, and those might be propelled even more by the general population, or when you get big investment firms and asset managers that hold tens of billions or trillions of dollars of people's assets in these mutual funds, asset management houses, etc. When you get those types of firms backing more centralized, regulated currencies and technologies, those might move a lot further than the decentralized ones. But I think there's also a very big part of the population in the digital currency space that is in favor of the decentralized model not being influenced by governments, and I think those have a very important place and will also probably do quite well. And I think time will only tell to see how governments regulate it, and that is starting to happen with a lot of indications from the biggest governments in the world: Russia, India, China, Korea, Japan, the Eurozone, the US, all kind of moving in the direction of regulating in different ways, and how to tax them, how to make sure that the average person is protected from these technologies, as well as has the ability to invest or believe in these technologies in whatever way they want to. And so you're seeing very different things going on around the world, and I think we'll see how it evolves over the next few years.
I think it's also really important that we make sure that these currencies are not anonymous. Like there's some sort of a way to link it back to their owner, just to kind of like prevent the risks that come with anonymity. So I think that's also really important. So let's move on to another question. Digital currency or cryptocurrency, it's a really powerful tool, and even though they are disruptive, but they're pretty much changing the way that people look at money. Do you think when combined with artificial intelligence, it can change the way that people want to invest their money?
Absolutely. I think that they're still in part, kind of separate trends moving, but there obviously is going to be some overlap, right? And so when we think about AI and what many companies are doing in terms of, say, like robo-advising, right? That also works in traditional capital markets. And that's kind of where a lot of that has grown out of. Of course, there's also a lot of AI and machine learning going into developing automated trading bots. And from what we're doing with our company, we know many different hedge funds in this space, many different kind of private capital managers that have automated trading bots active in these markets. And so there are also pretty sophisticated investors already in the digital currency space. But I do think that there will be some overlap. I think both will continue to innovate also in traditional capital markets. But of course, there's a place where they do overlap, and it will help both on the private capital side as well as hopefully on the public capital side to help the average person invest in an easier way, in a more hands-off way that is profitable, that is secure for them to kind of benefit from this.
So the industry is really volatile and it's a really young industry, but do you think that people need to seriously consider investing in the market?
Yeah, so I mean, what I would suggest is, of course, only invest to the means that you can. It is extremely risky. I mean, there are now more than 1,000 digital currencies out there. Many of them will go to zero. I mean, we haven't seen any major failures yet of these currencies, but I am confident that it will happen to many of them. There is a lot of smoke. There is a lot of people misleading other investors. There are a lot of these technologies and valuations that are based on an idea that's years and years away from becoming a reality. Many of these digital currencies would not have even a tenth of this valuation in traditional capital markets if they were raising. And so, it is highly speculative. And so I would caution on that front. But on the other hand, it is, probably the most innovative technology that we've seen since the creation of the internet and the ecosystem and the way that shaped, everything around us. And so, I would say that it is probably wise to have a very small percent of your portfolio, maybe 1 to 3%. Of course, I'm not an investment advisor, but I do think that the world is moving into an area where in maybe 3 or 5 years, we'll see, mutual funds already holding 1 to 3% of people's capital in digital currencies. And so even people might not know they're holding digital currencies, but some of their portfolio will be linked to it. I do think if you can get in, it is a good idea. Of course, again, be cautious. But there are also risks. I mean, digital currencies could continue to appreciate, but accounts are getting hacked as well. And so even if it appreciates, you might lose all your money. And this is a very real risk. And it could also be fraud and things that you traditionally be able to recover some money, through capital markets if there was fraud, and governments could go after it, and some money could be recovered. In this, it is a lot more difficult. Governments will be slower to respond, and it will be more difficult for them to track. And so, and even harder to recover. So, this does make it a lot tougher and a lot scarier, I think, for the average investor to go into.
So out of curiosity, how much money does one actually need to make a worthwhile investment in digital currency markets?
So it can vary significantly, and I think that just depends on the appetite of the individual, and that's kind of why I recommend a very small part of people's portfolios, if it makes sense. And that's kind of the way that I approach it. I've probably gone a lot more than 1 to 3%. Well, I definitely have gone in a lot more than 1 to 3%. But that's kind of my risk appetite at a young age, where I have the ability to recover that if this didn't go well, and if some of these digital currencies, do end up with a very low valuation or zero. But I would say, of course, speak to your investment advisor. Put in only an amount of money that you would be happy or okay with just losing it entirely, and then see kind of what happens. I mean, there's different people that have talked about Bitcoin going from where it is right now, around $4,000 to $10,000 to $100,000. We just don't know. I mean, about 3 weeks ago it was 2,000. It's 4,000 today, right? About a year ago it was even down to 500. And so you we've seen these massive appreciations even in what some people would call less risky digital currencies like Bitcoin, but I would still call it pretty speculative and a pretty high risk investment.
So sometime back there was news that approximately $32 million worth of digital currency Ether was stolen by hackers. I personally believe that such a high risk of cyber attacks, and given that the industry is so volatile because it's so young, I feel like these are obstacles that are going to prevent its growth. Like, what kind of solutions do you think can eliminate these risks?
Yeah, so it's a very tough one. I honestly don't think you can eliminate the risk entirely. I think anything that's connected to the internet has a risk of being hacked, and so I don't think that that's necessarily an excuse. I think the security of this industry needs to significantly improve, and this is something that's been a very big focus for our company as we've been launching, and we believe we're coming out with a platform that is much more secure than essentially anyone in emerging markets, and as secure, if not more secure, than many of the top players in the industry. But it is still a risk, and it will continue to be. And you even see traditional companies, Fortune 500, etc., that will release statements saying they've been hacked, they've lost credit card information of consumers, etc. I think what we need to do is get to a point where the industry has sufficient insurance to help protect people when it does get hacked. We need to also make sure that these hacks can't be done, or hacks when I call it, I think a lot of them are also fraud, and I think that we need to be protected from what happens when there's fraud. How do we minimize these types of things? And there can also be, because it's digital, there can also be issues in the code, and this has happened with Ethereum at times, and some of the other digital currencies where the DAO, and so there's times where the coding of the coins or digital currencies are actually flawed, like inherently flawed, and this can lead to risks and the ability for it to be hacked. So we do need to bring security up. We do need to improve this over time, but it is possible. I mean, we have companies that we do trust more so than what we're seeing in the digital currency space, and that might be a lot of people put trust into Facebook, Google with their information, into government with a lot of your private information. And so there is an ability to create trust and to create a system where if it does get hacked, we can help to compensate people for those losses. And I think that the industry has a long way to go before it gets there, but that is the direction that we need to move in.
How long do you think we have before digital currencies become a prime unit of trade? Or how long do you think we have before it kind of outperforms gold or silver on the stock market?
So that's a good question. I mean, it has exploded. I mean, that is for sure. I mean, we're looking at over $145 billion industry right now with digital currencies. I mean, this was a fraction of the size a few years ago. Gold is over a $7 trillion industry by comparison. I don't know if it'll replace gold's position entirely as a way to diversify against traditional assets, but I think it is starting to, and I think it will continue to do that to an extent. I think it's already becoming a primary method of trade, but I think it'll only become more so once it's regulated fully. And that's why I do think regulation is good for the industry to an extent, but I do think there's also certain things that are put at risk in the industry when you regulate it, because a lot of the premise that's part of the creation of digital currencies has been based off the fact that it's decentralized, not able to be regulated, and so we've got to be able to balance that. I do think the anonymity, there are some benefits to it, but there's obviously certain things that aren't great, such as a month or two ago we heard about someone that had money laundered over $4 billion, which is just crazy, and that should not be allowed to happen, and it is a good thing that this person was caught. But once this becomes regulated, and it is already moving in that direction according to governments and central banks of the biggest countries in the world, then more and more countries, financial institutions will adopt it, asset managers will adopt it, science companies, boards across the world in any industry are going to be talking about how does blockchain impact our companies, how can we use this to influence our businesses, and also these digital currencies will become mediums of trade in some way or another. On the other hand, I also do think we got too many of these digital currencies maybe already. I mean, over 1,000. And so, that will likely consolidate into a number of major winners and a number of major losers in this market. And so time will also tell which one of those succeed and which ones do not. But also just looking at historical trends with the dot-com bubble and seeing how many internet companies didn't succeed, but also how many did succeed out of that. There will be some sort of similarities to that. So, we'll see when that is and how soon that'll happen. But I think the industry as a whole will continue to get stronger in the long run.
Okay. So that kind of takes me to my next question. Do you think there's a possibility of any one particular cryptocurrency becoming the dominant one, perhaps even to the extent of becoming a monopoly?
So I don't think one will become, say, a monopoly. I do think there's different underlying technologies and use cases for a number of different coins. And so I think there will be several different coins that do get stronger and stronger and will become the de facto in their industries. And it's similar to what you might see in in traditional companies. You've got very strong players in different industries, but there can be more than one. And so you've got Bitcoin that has many different uses, but one of the big ones is a store of value. And a lot of people believe that it will continue to cannibalize gold. And so that one may continue and kind of become well, it already is, but it might continue to grow as the dominant player in that use case. Ethereum has a very different use case, which is more of like an ecosystem, and it also helps to fuel many different coins and industries that are linked to it as kind of like a platform. And so, that may continue to dominate in that industry or as that use case. But maybe a different one will come up in that space to become kind of the de facto as an ecosystem platform. But there are many different types of coins with very different use cases and very different technologies. And I think there will be winners with each of those different kind of niches or technologies that are there. And so I do think there'll be several winners. I also do think the industry as a whole will continue to grow, but there will also be many losers and many that will go to essentially zero, and I think people need to be cautious about that.
Okay. So obviously now is the right time to get involved in the industry. Is there any way that students can get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a growing ecosystem in Canada, and I think many people don't actually know this, but Ethereum's founder was based out of Toronto and Waterloo, right? And so, unfortunately, of course, Ethereum kind of went abroad just due to regulation and kind of other things that were more beneficial to not launching or continuing that technology being, say, a Canadian technology. But there is a very interesting ecosystem. There are thousands of people in Toronto and across the nation that are very successful in this space and are continuing to develop kind of their businesses in different ways in this space. I think that students can also reach out to me, and if they want to know more, if they want to help us out on kind of our journey and our mission of creating a global exchange to help fuel the growth of this industry across emerging markets and developed markets, we're happy to get bright students involved. And so there are lots of different ways. It is a very exciting time in this space, and it is the right time to get in, as you mentioned.
Okay, so let's wrap this up with one final question. You mentioned that you wrote a book on how to excel in university. Can you give our students some advice on how they can do well in university and after graduating?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've actually now published 3 books over the last few years, and I've actually got them here. And so we've got the first book, which was called Your Guide to Succeed in University, the second book, which was called Your Guide to Get into Medical School, which we published with many successful medical doctors, as well as the third book and the most recent one, which is called Your Guide to Succeed After Graduation, focused on helping students once they graduate and young professionals to succeed in life post-graduation. And absolutely, I think that there's many things that students could do to kind of prepare and succeed in university and beyond that. And I think some of those include improving their time management skills, also focusing on improving your academics, and we talk about certain strategies in the books, but also it's not only about the academics, and sometimes many students forget that, right? And so it's, how do you build your soft skills? How do you build your work experience and your development, personal development, to become a stronger leader? I think one of the biggest things that students can do is finding mentors, and I generally recommend 3 types of mentors for undergraduate students, right? And so one would be finding someone going into an industry that you want to go into that's maybe just graduated or in their 4th year, for example. The second mentor might be someone that is maybe a few years out of school, ideally in an industry that you're in, or maybe has moved into another industry, but that can help guide you and understand what are some of those possibilities after you graduate, after you start your first job, and to help you kind of just open up to what are some of those other possibilities. And then the third mentor would be someone that's maybe in the middle stage of their career, or maybe a business executive, maybe even retired, but someone that can also just provide some insight into what is some of the possibilities. How has their career changed so significantly from what they expected it to be? What are some things you should be thinking about? Some industries that might be interesting based on your personality and your interests. And I think that will go a very long way. And sometimes I find students say, well, why would someone want to help me? Why would someone want to mentor me? But what I found, at least in my career, and how much mentors and advisors help shape almost everything that I've done so far, is that people love to give back. And as long as you approach it with a way of also helping them, helping to be open, maybe also helping to reverse mentor these individuals around things in technology that you might know that they might not know, or things with if they've got kids and things that you wish could have been done differently, or things you think parents could do differently to help their kids develop. And that might be something that a senior executive or a business leader might be interested to get a different opinion from a young person that's still approaching their career. And so there's different things that you can also offer back that allows you to create kind of a cycle that is a win-win for both sides. And I think finding mentors is something that's really key. And I think also just networking and learning how to approach networking in an effective manner, and we talk about that as well in the book. I think that's really, really important for students to do, regardless of the industry that you're going into, because literally every industry requires networking. It requires the ability to approach and talk to people and find solutions that might not otherwise exist, through collaboration, through discussions and brainstorming. And so very, very important to kind of expand that network. And I didn't mention, but all of the books are actually given away free of charge. And so you can visit the website succeedseries.com, and you can download the free ebook. It's also on iBooks and Google Play and Amazon. And so that's kind of my gift back to students and young people today, to kind of hopefully do better than I did, and go an extra step forward, and help propel their careers.
All right, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out for this interview, and I wish you all the best with your startup next month. My
pleasure. Thank you, and keep up the great work with the Commerce Society. And I think it's fantastic to see what you and your team has done, and what the Commerce Society has been doing over the last few years. And so keep up the great work, and thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much.